I still relatively frequently see people investing in SKUs that don't make up a large portion of their revenue. And what you're doing is you're taking a big bag of money and you're putting it on a shelf, and you can't do anything with that bag of money until you somehow can sell through the inventory.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. Are you ready to unlock the full potential and growth in your business? You've already crossed 7 figures in sales, but the challenge is knowing how to take your business to the next level. Join Josh Hadley, an 8-figure Ecomm business owner and investor, as he interviews highly successful business owners. Get ready, because you're going to learn specific actions you can take today to help your business reach its full potential and leave a lasting impact on the world.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hadley, where I interview the top business leaders in e-commerce. Past guests include Kevin King, Michael E. Gerber, author of The E-Myth, Norm Farrar, and Stephen Pope of My Amazon Guy. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Matt Putra, an experienced CFO and founder of ADEX. Today, we are going to be sharing some actionable strategies that you can implement in your business to A, make it more profitable, and then B, be able to bring more cash into the business so that you can continue to scale to 8 figures and beyond. This episode is brought to you by Ecomm Breakthrough Consulting, where I help 7-figure companies grow to 8 figures and beyond. Listen, Matt, I started my business back in 2015, and I grew it to an 8-figure brand in 7 years. But I made a lot of mistakes along the way that made the path of getting to 8 figures take a lot longer than it needed to. I made bad hiring decisions. There were times where I had to take money from my own personal bank account in order to fund payroll because of the cash flow constraints. When COVID happened, we watched our business decrease by 90% overnight. So I was stressed about whether it would be able to survive. And I remember wishing for a mentor, somebody who could guide me through the maze of scaling up, somebody who had been there, done that, and could help me overcome all of these obstacles. That's why I've decided to offer that one-on-one coaching and consulting, where I share the nitty-gritty cash flow frameworks, the sales strategies, the operating systems that have helped me scale my own brand. And because I believe in giving each entrepreneur my undivided attention, I only work with 3 clients at a time. So first, to begin, I want to make sure we're a perfect match. And so I offer a comprehensive business strategy audit session. And this is my way of providing you as much value as I can up front to see if we're a good fit. So to our listeners, if this sounds like something you're interested in, email me at josh@ecommbreakthrough.com. That's Ecomm with 2 M's. And in your subject line, say, I want to pick your brain, and then let's chat about how we can take your brand to the next level. But today I am super excited to introduce y'all to Matt Putra. Matt is an experienced e-commerce CFO, having served 40 plus e-commerce brands and agencies across the US, Canada, UK, EU, and Australia, with revenues ranging from 1 million to 80 million. And before starting ADEX, Matt was actually the CFO of a private equity group that did over 500 million in investments across Canada. ADEX was created to help e-commerce owners scale their businesses with more cash and less stress. They do that in 3 ways: by providing strategic financial support from fractional CFOs, bookkeeping, accounting, financial operations, and then 3, helping brands improve their operating systems, making sure that all team members are aligned on the right goals. So with that introduction, welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you so much, Josh. It's a pleasure.
Matt, super excited to have you on the show here and really dive into a lot of the key financial metrics that are the lifeblood of any e-commerce brand. At the end of the day, if you have no cash, it is really challenging in order to scale. So Matt, I guess that would be my first question that I want to dive into. You've worked with a lot of brands, you talk to a lot of brands, and I'm curious to hear, what are some of the big mistakes or just the general mistakes that you see e-commerce brand owners making in their business as it relates to finance and profits and cash?
Sure. I'll start with some common ones that I just always see. I think one is adding fixed costs too early. So adding hires, adding like an office, anything fixed. And I see that because, you let's say you have a a good few months or even a good year, and you're like, great, now I can kind of take my foot off the gas a bit and I can hire this and that. And then there's a tough year or a tough few months. And so then you're like, oh, then you're in a pinch. So this is something I see throughout everybody I work with, and it never changes. And so one of my mantras is like, be as lean as possible, as long as possible. The other one that I see is buying too much inventory or buying too much of the wrong SKUs for inventory. We've all heard the 80-20 rule, and 20% of your SKUs is 80% of your revenue. And so I still relatively frequently see people investing in SKUs that don't make up a large portion of their revenue. And what you're doing is you're taking a big bag of money and you're putting it on a shelf, and you can't do anything with that bag of money until you somehow can sell through the inventory. Whereas if you could invest it in, I don't know, creative or ads or something else, you would see the return a bit faster. So that's something I see quite a bit. One newer one that I'm noticing is people are having a hard time figuring out how to scale their ad spend. And over the past few years, there's been a lot of learning about contribution margin, meaning if you deduct all your variable expenses from $1 of revenue, how many cents are left over, right? For Amazon sellers, it's usually between 10 and 20%. Shopify between 15 and let's say 25. And for wholesale, it's actually like, it could be upwards of 30 cents on $1. So what's happening is people learned about this and agencies learned about this. And now we're like, okay, great. Let's keep it at 20% always. Well, as you and I know, and most people listening, as you scale, as you buy more traffic, the traffic gets more expensive, and you don't get corresponding decreases in your costs from your suppliers or your shipping costs even. And in fact, as we were just talking about before we started the show, Amazon is now taking more money from you too. And so your contribution margin as a percentage tends to decline. So what I'm seeing is when the contribution margins decline a bit, I'm seeing people pull back on the growth. Well, what we're missing though is, let's say your contribution margin is at $3 million a year, it's 20%, so 600,000. So at $4 million a year, your contribution margin could be, let's say, maybe not 15%, but 18%, and you actually make more dollars in your pocket. And so it's okay to allow some decay in that margin as a percentage, as long as you make sure you have more dollars. So that's something that's fairly new that I'm seeing people over-indexing on contribution margin. Yeah.
Interesting. I love that. And I kind of want to double down on that, because cash flow is the lifeblood of any e-commerce business. And so talk to me more about it. Don't worry so much about that contribution margin, because again, we talked about this. Amazon fees are only going up. Amazon inventory placement fees, low inventory fees. I mean, the fees are just endless. And guess what? They're here to stay. They're never going away. They're only going to increase. So just plan on it.
Yeah.
So Matt, how do we take that into consideration, saying like, we want to grow, but that contribution margin is just continually going to be chipped away at. So what do we focus on?
Well, I think, so there's a few things. One is understanding, and I'm really looking off here as I'm doing some math so that I can actually speak more eloquently to it. So one of the things is understanding your contribution dollars, not just the margin. And I made a tool, and I'll send it to you. You can send it to your listeners and use it however you'd like, really. But the key with the growth side is to understand contribution dollars. So what I mean by that is, again, like I said before, if you're doing $3 million a year and your contribution margin is 20%, that's $600,000, sort of, that will cover your fixed costs and or go into your pocket, right? As you grow, you can allow for some decrease in that margin as a percentage. So at $3.5 million, if you did 18%, you make $630,000, which means it's actually $30,000 more in your pocket. So you can allow for some decay in that margin as a percentage. And that's something to watch, and it's something to understand, because what I'm seeing is people going, well, I want to go to 3.1, but the margin decays a little bit. And they're like, nope, I'm going back to 3. But in reality, there's more dollars on the table that you could bring into the business and put in your pocket as an owner. And so that's a pretty big one right now. And again, you can map this out. So the tool that I'll give you, it'll help you map this all the way through, and even give you tracking for your agency and an email you can send them to help them understand all of it. But basically, you're going to deep dive into your P&L, and I have a video that walks you through the whole thing. But deep dive into your P&L, deep dive into all your variable costs, and you can look at how they might change as you scale your ad spend and revenue. And then you can kind of target on what is the minimum you're willing to, the maximum decay you're willing to accept. And then there's an email template and everything to send to your agency to say, look, we want to scale. Here's what you're allowed to let our ad spend go to, and these are the parameters around it. And and so it helps. That's a big one, because again, generally speaking, if you put $1 into ads, I mean, again, it doesn't actually work like this, but you can expect $1 back in 1 to 2 months. So if you learn how to scale with this dollars in mind, you will actually increase your cash flow and your profit, even if the margin as a percentage declines. So that's a big one.
No, I love that. And I think that's super important. And it kind of like puts the emphasis on why it's so important to have like somebody with some sort of financial background, and like even have like a fractional CFO on your team to be able to say like, hey guys, we don't need to be so worried about like the Amazon ad costs are going up right now. Ideally, that's not happening, but that's the reality, right? So that's okay, because, hey, we're still going to be more profitable or bring in more cash. It just might be at a lower contribution margin. And there are things you could obviously try to raise your prices, but I think on Amazon, everybody's seeing more lower price competitors joining every day, which makes it even more challenging to say, well, I'm going to solve this by just raising my prices. And the US consumer, I think, is more conservative than they ever have been right now.
Yeah, well, and actually I'm seeing a couple people I know have highlighted some pretty interesting indicators that there might be an upswing in purchasing activity. There's a consumer confidence index, and then there was something in the S&P that changed just very, very recently. And I wish I could remember the indicator, but I don't. And that indicator has gone up, and it predicated another upswing in the economy like a couple years ago. So we might see some ability to raise prices soon, especially if consumer confidence is going up. But you're right. I mean, there's always price pressures, and losing your buy box is, not fun. So
yeah, 100%. So Matt, I'm also interested, let's go back to one of the other mistakes that people generally make, and that's adding fixed costs too early. Give me some additional examples of just like bad fixed costs that you see people adding onto their business, and give me some case studies to work with here.
So generally, the umbrella topic is building infrastructure for who you're going to be rather than who you are. That's the overall mistake. What I mean by that is, let's say you're 3 million today. You could assume you'll be at 5, 6, 10 next year or the year after. And you might want to go, I'm going to build a team that can handle 10. But if the 10 doesn't happen, you've lost a lot of money. And so this is something I've seen time and time again. There's an agency, for example, I used to work with. They hired a bunch of really great talent, 6-figure talent, to manage relationships, to manage operations, and the growth didn't materialize. And so they got into massive cash crunch. We had to cut all the staff and figure out how to do things again. That's one. There's another one where they were growing quite quickly, and like past 8 figures. Well, not past them, it'd be like into the 8 figures and mid. But they built a leadership team that was like for 9 figures. And so what happened is that, and this will happen to anybody that builds infrastructure for who they're going to be, is you're taking money out of the available capital to grow the business, right? Because let's say you're swapping $100,000 that you could spend on growth for $100,000 for a person, and that person isn't going to give you the velocity of growth. Usually, most people do not, as quickly as the $100,000 spent on actual growth activities, so driving revenue activities. What has been happening is that this client, or at least at the time that we worked with them, they were starting to get overtaken by some competitors who stayed very, very lean and had, let's say they could spend 40% of revenue on growth activities, and this client could spend 20. And so when you can spend 40% of your revenue on growth, it's a massive competitive advantage because you can afford to pay more for the eyeballs and the customers than your other person can because they're stuck with all this infrastructure. So, and so there's really two options. Either figure out a way to grow cheaper, which isn't always available, bring your infrastructure back to where it should be, which is definitely possible. And in some cases, you can raise money or use debt, but using debt in this case is something I don't recommend because it's just, if it doesn't work, you're saddled with all this debt. Equity can work because your investors know that there's risk and stuff, but sometimes there's negative founder effects from raising equity at the wrong time. Build your infrastructure. I say build it in arrears. So as you hit the growth, your team's going to be stressed, and just tell them, look, we're going to hit another level. It's going to be super stressful. Know that I know that. Know that I'm going to be adding people and as we stabilize at the new level. And that's how I run my own teams.
I think, Matt, you hit the nail right on the head here. Because there's one phrase that I love, and this quote is, whoever can spend the most to acquire the customer wins. Period.
Totally.
Okay. So if most of your money and expense is going to your team and overhead, like you're fighting a massive uphill battle to the basement entrepreneur that's working 80 hours a week and doing 100%. Everything himself, right? 100%. And he's putting everything he earns, and he's living in mom's basement, so he doesn't have to pay anything. He's milking everything from his parents still, right? That guy is investing 100% back into the business. That guy's going to grow faster than the person that's totally saddled with a lot of overhead expenses. And so I loved your recommendation that's kind of like building in arrears and letting your team know, like, hey, we will expand, but only as things stabilize and only as we can appropriately add new team members. And I myself have made that mistake in the past of saying, hey, we want to be a $25 million brand. Now that's cute, but if I go higher to go be a $25 million brand 100%. Immediately, like I'm saddling myself up with and preventing myself from actually being able to grow in order to get there, because totally. Now I have to pull back an ad spend in order to bring in more money for the business. Yeah. So I've experienced this. So I just wanted to echo that. Like that statement is so true. Totally.
And the other thing that I didn't say, which I know you're a fan of, is people still don't understand the level of talent you can get from non-North American folks. I think you and I both have high level people from Philippines or wherever. I have some in Argentina, Philippines, and other places as well. And I did a competitor survey for this client that we used to work with, and they're similar 8-figure. No, one was a bit bigger, 8 figures. This one was like lower 8 figures. And I looked at the team structure for this other company. They were less than half the number of people, and most of their staff were overseas. Even some of their directors and managers and whatnot were overseas. And so these people, because they just believed in that there's talent everywhere, they're paying a third to a half of what the other company was paying. And so then again, all that money can go back into growth. And I know you know a lot about this because I got your deck on hiring from offshore, and I use it like the Bible in some cases.
Yeah. And Matt, I think that's a good call out too, that, you know, there's a lot of good talent overseas. I don't think the US or Canada, North America is just like, or even the UK, right? Europe. I don't think that they own all the intellectual capital in the world by any means, right? And we've proven this time and time again that we've had candidates really run circles around people that are applying from the US. And so being very cognizant that not every role needs to be hired from North America, that you can go and source management level staff overseas. And if people want to learn more about that, one of my earlier episodes walks you through that 7-step process.
Yeah.
You'll also hear me speak about it on stages, but I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, and I will just echo that Josh's 7 steps I've seen on a webinar. Go get them, listen to it, do it exactly how he says it, because it works. Like we found good staff before I met Josh, but using his methods, like I've increased the hit rate of getting great people on board. So definitely to all the listeners, like go listen to that episode. And I will tell people, like, I've done a study on a 9-figure company. Even they have manager, director level. I shouldn't say even. They also have director and manager level staff from, I believe, Colombia, Brazil, and other places. Like, and again, people's it's untapped. It will. I think someday people will realize it in en masse. But right now, it's a total competitive advantage to understand that that's the value out there.
Yeah, 100%. It truly is like a core competitive advantage that 100%. You can implement in your business.
100%.
Love that. All right, Matt, you also talked about another mistake people are making is putting money into inventory for the wrong SKUs. So tell me more about that, and how's that a problem, and how do brand owners, especially if you're trying to stay lean, and you've got a large SKU count, for example, like, how do you actually do the correct demand planning, forecasting, etc.?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I think a lot of people start to add SKUs because they're like, well, how can I increase my AOV and my loyalty and all these things? And those are probably good reasons to think about it. And I think what I would suggest is if you do believe, well, first of all, understand your customers really, really, really well. I work with one brand currently. Every time they launch something new, it's the best launch they ever have. And I've never seen someone do that consistently. And they understand their customers really well. They have like community and they talk, and their customers are all on TikTok and they talk to each other. So they've cultivated a group of customers that like talk to each other so they can monitor and see what people are saying. Second thing is they monitored their competitors, and they could see what their competitors were launching. And they had some way to track like the estimated sales of their competitor launches, and by colors too. I believe that the software was called Particle. They don't pay me to say that, but so they knew what competitors were launching. They knew it was working for competitors, and so then when they launched competitive products, every time they launched a new product, it was better than the last launch. So if you want to do it like that. They also launched limited runs. So if it failed, they didn't lose a ton of money. So let's say you've done some. Let's say you want to do some launches, right? That's a good way to do it. Is with this what this client of ours did. The inverse, whatever, is where you don't do a bunch of testing. You just this product should make sense with that product, and so then you just buy a bunch of it and hope that it sells. Don't do it that way. And then let's say you have a number of SKUs in your business. The first thing that I look at when I join one of the first things I look at is relative rate of sale across your SKUs and the percentage of revenue each of your SKUs contributes, and then the margins by SKU. And I am a big fan of addition by deletion, meaning grow your business by removing shit that holds you back. And so I will recommend people cut their bottom 20% of SKUs. And I'll bring that up once or twice a year at minimum. Oh, hey, we cut those 20%. Here's another 20%. And I am being a little glib sometimes, but I want people to think about it, because, like, do you really need that SKU? Is it really helping you? If you didn't have to demand plan for it, if you didn't have to talk to suppliers about it, if you didn't have to get financing for it, if you didn't have to update your PDPs and your Amazon store listings and you didn't have to pay the storage fees in Amazon FBA centers, and if you didn't have all that stuff, would you be better off? And in some cases, those bottom 20%, you would just be better off not having them at all. And this is about staying lean in costs, but also lean in focus. And there's a transition point where you can add new stuff because you're big enough, but I don't really know when that is. I think it's different for everybody. But again, be lean in your SKUs too. Don't launch 6 colors, launch 2, or test colors like with a limited run, or even try stuff on pre-sale. Like sometimes it doesn't always work if you have to buy the inventory 6 months in advance. But again, what I'm really saying is cut stuff that doesn't work all the time. Sort of always be pruning things that don't work for your business, including inventory. So now why, right? If I have a slow turning SKU and I buy a bunch of it, imagine taking a big bag of money and just putting it on a shelf. And now that big bag of money is putting on a shelf. Not only is it locked up money, but I'm actually paying Amazon to touch it and count it and hold it and for the storage space. So I'm paying Amazon money to hold on to my money, which is crazy. You wouldn't pay a bank to hold your cash. Actually, in some countries they have to do that. But anyway, neither here nor there. You wouldn't pay a bank to just keep your money for you. No, you would, if that was what was going to happen, you would take the money away from the bank and hold it yourself. Well, do that with your SKUs too. If your SKU doesn't move, if you have a SKU that doesn't move, you have to get rid of it. Sure, but don't buy more of it. Because again, that money, I could do a bunch of stuff with it if I had it instead of Amazon holding onto it for me. I could, again, put it into growth. I could pay myself more, maybe. I could pay down debts. I could buy more of the one SKU or the few SKUs that really work. When you buy more of those SKUs that really work, then you can have more purchasing power with the supplier. And you can say, well, I'm going to focus on these things, and it makes it easy for your supplier. It makes it easier for you to forecast demand. And when you can forecast demand, you can then give that to your supplier. And anyway, I'm going on here, but I have a client where they focused on these core SKUs, and their supplier then gave them 30-day terms. When we started giving them annual forecasts for those few SKUs, then the supplier said, oh, hey, what if we made some in advance and held them for you that you didn't have to pay for, as in the supplier would kept safety stock. And then the supplier went so far as to say, well, look, if you're in a pinch, we'll give you 60-day terms if you have to have it. Why? Because we focused on these few with one supplier, again, lean and focus, with the supplier, cultivated a relationship with the supplier, but again, didn't have a bunch of SKUs that we didn't need. And so now we're getting all these concessions. And so again, I think, probably even sub 20 million. Like most companies don't have a massive amount of firepower to manage multiple high performing SKUs. I don't see that. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's great feedback. And I think that the important thing that rang true to me is be lean in your focus, right? So if you can remove 20% of your SKUs, right? You talked about all the financial benefits, but let's talk about like just the ease of mind that comes and the freedom, the creativity that can come 100%. If your team or yourself is no longer bogged down by having to demand plan or think about or strategize how we're going to sell these, how are we going to increase sales, whatever it needs to be. If it's just the runt of the litter, then just move on, right? And focus on the things that are actually working and moving the needle in the business. So I know that's good food for thought, even for myself, because we have a really large SKU catalog. And so I think that's, it's focusing on the one thing, right? And being able to double down in the areas where you're winning. That's where the fastest growth will come from in your business.
Yeah. And I think like, again, I said 20 million, but like that's not a hard rule or anything. There are people that manage a larger catalog quite well, but probably not at 5 million. So if you're, I don't know, what would you say the number is? Like when do you think someone has the firepower to manage a larger catalog?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is like every business is different, right? And at the end of the day, like for us, we built our business based off of, SKUs that could sell 200 units a month, right? That was like our bread and butter, scaling up our brand. Now that required bringing in a lot of SKUs in order to get to an 8-figure brand for sure. However, There's other people that I would, the grass is always greener on the other side, but that have 3, 5 SKUs and an 8-figure brand, right? And they're moving thousands of units a month, right? And so it's different based on like the strategy, but you obviously need to plan accordingly, right? For whatever your business model is. And so just know that, whoever else you're probably competing with, right? They're probably in the same boat. And the principle is this: can you be as lean as possible so that you can reinvest more money to be able to grow faster than they are? Whoever can spend the most to win the customer is going to be the ones that win at the end of the day.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense for sure.
So, Matt, I'm very interested, though. You provide a lot of CFO coaching to clients. Let's get into the nitty gritty details and the weeds here, like maybe even sharing some case studies of here are things that e-commerce business owners need to be improving in their business and implementing.
Sure. I'll do one case study for a client. They were losing 6 figures a year, mid 6 figures they lost in the prior 2 years before we joined them. And then when we joined, the very next year, they made 6 figures, and now they're making 7 figures, and they're going to exit in the summer. So basically, so these people, one of the things they had a really great community, and they ended up not being able to manage the community. It becomes a lot of work when communities get large, from what I understand. I don't have to do it myself, so I don't really know. So when they sort of wound down the community, they had to then figure out on the paid ad side, how are they going to perform? And so that ended up being a struggle, just because they had a hard time with this contribution dollar and margin thing. And so they weren't sure, how do I scale ads and growth while giving my agency clear directions for when to pull back and when to push and all that. So one of the first things we did was, of course, we built a financial model and everything, which is an income statement and also cash flows and also balance sheet. So one of the first things we did was we built a separate sort of model for the marketing spend and growth to give the agency very good clarity on what are our targets and what are the metrics that we need to watch, and how do you self-manage yourself as an agency working for us. So that was big. Another thing that we did was a strong focus on cash flows. So the model that we built it sort of with e-commerce drivers, meaning ad spend, page visits, conversion rates, rate of sales. But we did it like, a lot of companies will do a forecast. We look at, okay, last year in June we sold 10,000 units. This year we should do 10% better, so we'll sell 10,100 units. We don't do that. We look at how many impressions or visits do I have to buy? What's my customer acquisition cost? What does the customer do when we get them? And that's how we model our sales. And so we did that. We did everything else, so inventory purchasing, planning, and all this. And so we would meet this person probably bi-weekly for the first 6 months. And every time we met, we go, this is what's the plan. Here's how it's looking. What do we think about go forward? And we were constantly changing assumptions, testing. If this happens, then cash looks like that. If this happens, then cash looks like this. And we were testing these scenarios all constantly for the first 6 months. And what we created was an extreme focus on cash flow for this client. And we said, when you push ads, cash goes up. But if you push ads and it breaks, cash goes down. And so we were helping them figure that out. We were looking at how much inventory can you buy and when can you buy it. So again, if you overbuy even a good SKU, it's still a problem, because now you have too much of the SKU and you don't have money to sell that SKU. So how do you buy the right amount of inventory for the season and for the sales period that you're in? So for them, that was a big part. We also we do some operational consulting too. So they didn't do any pre-sales ever. So when they sold out, they just shut it off. Well, I was like, why don't you test it? And pre-sales crushed. Again, they knew their customers quite well, and so their pre-sales really crushed and put a ton of money back into the business. So we recommended that. That worked awesome. We also help them find debt, and as good of sources of debt as you can find when you've lost 6 figures 2 years in a row. It's not great, I'll tell you. But we help them find the debt and manage the cash flow. So we had to then integrate debt payments, inventory payments, marketing, hiring, staff, all the stuff had to integrate. And we were looking at it all the time. So then we made the debt payoff plans, and as of now, they're almost all the way out of all that debt they had to take on back then.
What are some of like the cash flow strategies that you could recommend people implement in their own brands then? Like is it adding, paying for your supplier invoices on credit cards instead of wires, right? And
good point. Yeah,
certain credit cards for ad spend. Like walk me through some like quick hitting, like if I need more cash flow in my business, give me some quick wins.
Okay. Huge quick win that we've seen. You can sometimes get terms with the supplier by offering them like 1% more on cost of goods. We've done this successfully a couple times. We went from 30 days with the supplier to 60 just by saying, hey, what if we pay you 1.5% more on this invoice? Will you take it? For a big company, they do not have opportunities to make what equates to a 20% return a year. So often, if they're big and they trust you, they'll take that deal instantly. We sent that to somebody, they accepted it in 2 hours. Yes, I'll take it, no problem. So we got 60-day terms. I have seen, another strategy is a good friend of mine named Kevin. He taught me this concept called nibbles. Nibbles are very small, easy asks of your suppliers. Meaning right now, if you're on 50% on order, 50% on shipment, you don't ask, can I go to net 30 fully? No, it's too big of an ask. They won't do it. Then what you'll do is you'll go, look, can I go 40% on deposit, 60% on shipment? Or can you go 30-70? Then you hold up your end of the bargain for 3 months. 3 months later, you call back and go, great, now that I'm 40-60, can I go 40% on deposit, 40% on shipment, and 20% on delivery? And you're asking these little asks, and they stack up over time. And if you can just do, there's a power of one thing that it's called. If you can sell 1% more, if you can pay your suppliers 1 day later, if you can collect cash 1 day earlier, anyway, you can kind of measure this. We did this for a brand making $5 million a year, and they would have $200,000 more in their bank account from these very small changes. So back to what can you do? Call your suppliers, ask for nibbles. In terms of debt, Kick Further is a really good one for American folks, American businesses, because they have the ability to give you money, and you don't have to start paying till your inventory lands, and you start selling it. The reason that's huge is because most financing, including Shopify, Waveflyer, Clearco, a few others like that, you'll take money for inventory, you'll pay your deposit, and you'll already start paying Waveflyer back, for example, and you'll pay them half or 75% back before your inventory lands, meaning that like you're not even using the money for the purpose, like you're paying the money back with itself rather than the purpose of the money was inventory, and selling the inventory paid the money off. That doesn't even happen. So Kick Further is a really, really, really great option.
How much do they charge?
A lot. It's crazy.
Is it?
But it's typically, the APR is like 40%. It's nuts. However, the interest cost is rarely the best way to measure debt. It's the payment terms. Here's why. So let's say you take $100,000 from Waveflyer. Most small businesses under 10 million will have a 4, maybe 5 month payback. Okay. So you'll take $100,000, you'll purchase your inventory or pay the deposit with your inventory, let's say. Okay. And over the next 4 months, you'll pay Waveflyer off. Then your inventory lands. And then you're like, well, I still don't have any money. So you're going to take another Waveflyer to pay off the Waveflyer, basically. Whereas with Kick Further, you'll pay for your inventory. It will land. You'll start selling it. And then you'll start paying Kick Further. So the margin of the inventory is paying off the debt rather than new debt paying off old debt. So yeah, it's 40%. But rarely is that the most important thing to look at. There are times that it's important, but payment terms are often the most important piece of debt to look at. You asked, should you pay for inventory on credit cards? In an ideal world, you wouldn't, and here's why. My general rule, if things are okay in the business, if things are not okay, you do whatever you have to do, right? If things are okay in the business, you want to match your debt payoff time frame with the payoff time frame of the activity that you're using the debt for. So for advertising, credit cards. Why? Well, you put $1 into your advertising machine today, you will get it back 30 to 60 days, which is when you have to pay the debt off with the credit card, right? With inventory, if you put it on your credit card, inventory doesn't land for 4 months, and so you're using other sources to pay off that inventory debt, which is again where those seller's fi is another good one. PayPal Capital is a good one. There's a bunch of good ones, and if you're 8 figures, Wayflyer has a really great enterprise product that's like a line of credit proper. So, but if you use your credit card to buy inventory, it's okay. It's not the worst, but it's only just okay because you're paying off the credit card with other stuff rather than the inventory paying off the credit card, right? Never use credit cards for like core like operating expenses like payroll. I know we wouldn't think of that, but sometimes you beg, borrow, and steal, and you're shifting money around, and so it really is your credit card that's paying your payroll. So we don't want to do that. But there are also some cards. I think Parker. I'm not as familiar with Parker, but I've heard that they have longer terms and longer payback time frames, so you can use inventory when that's the case on a Parker card. What else can you do? Oh, I mean, right now, I am suggesting to people. I mean, now this is different for Amazon. You don't want to sell out when you're on Amazon seller because it really hurts your visibility and all that. But if you're not on Amazon, I mean, you do want to allow yourself to sell out here and there, because if you're always never selling out, then you're always overbuying, right? And on Amazon, I think you would agree you probably shouldn't sell out on Amazon, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first rule of Amazon.
Right.
Never go out of stock.
Yeah,
right.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, so different. And the way you can manage your inventory is you can look at your. This is getting a bit technical, but you can look at your rate of growth, and you can look at your variation in sales, and you can actually use like normal distribution statistics to be 90% or 95% confidence level of in stock. I don't have a tool for that, unfortunately, but people on Upwork will be able to figure that out for you. If you get any like mathematician from anywhere on Upwork, they'd be able to answer that for you with like $500 probably. So, but yeah, you can use normal distributions to make sure you stay in stock with some sort of confidence level. Oh, and again, like the quick win is that growth piece, the contribution dollar, because again, if you're like, so I walked into, there was a company I worked with at one point doing high 8 figures. I walked in the door and made them $300,000 profit because they just weren't understanding the contribution dollar thing. So there's money lurking for most brands in this contribution dollar concept, which Josh will send people a tool if you want it. I made someone $300,000 in 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks I made $300,000 just because they didn't know. And so that's a fun one. Settle's another great inventory option. Yeah, they're where settle.co, I think, or maybe it's .com now, but they're an inventory provider where they will pay for your inventory and you will pay them back over time. They're pretty good. They tend to match fairly well the inventory timelines, and they're pretty good to work with. The golden standard would be zero, your customers are paying you before you have to pay your suppliers. So you can stack facilities together to do that. You can use like a Parker with a settle with negotiated terms with their supplier. And in some cases, I think Obvi actually got that 0 days at some point by stacking these pieces together. So you can get there. And I think the stack they talked about could be settle plus Parker plus terms, is I believe what they talked about. I got pretty close with terms and settle and a line of credit. basically. But then now your customers are paying you before you have to pay your suppliers, which is then you can scale to the moon and quite quickly.
Yep. That's game changing for a business, right?
Yeah.
Having that cash conversion cycle be positive. You make money before you've paid your suppliers back.
100%.
That's game changing. So I love any other and that's the reason why I asked you about credit cards for inventory, because there's like the Amex Plum card gives you 60 days, right?
Yep.
So Parker, that's a new one I haven't heard of. Are there any other, and I know some credit cards are good on ad spend because you've got like 4x bonus points on Amex card, the gold card for ad spend, right? And it's like, look, you're going to pay this off. So you might as well collect the points. So any other like quick credit card wins that you know of, or cards that people use?
Ramp is one. Parker Brex could be one. BREX.
Love it. Love it. Those are some awesome quick wins, Matt. Do you have any other case studies to share with us?
Yeah. So another one of our CFOs, his name is Leandro, brilliant man. He joined a client where they were spending $500K. Now this is a bit of Shopify, a bit of Amazon, both. And they were spending $500K a month combined. And they were doing sales of whatever it was at the time. I don't recall. When we looked at the contribution dollar, we sensed that there was a whole bunch of ad spend that was actually decreasing their contribution dollars. And so what we did is we started modeling and testing what would happen if we decreased ad spend. At the end of the day, we cut ad spend by a third, and they went from making minus $50,000 a month to $150,000 a month profit. And so what was happening here is they were just buying at the way top end of the traffic. And so, we cut ad spend by a third, and they made like $100,000 more money per month.
Interesting.
So that was pretty crazy. Yeah. And
just
that's
making advertising more efficient. And are you tracking that through like a ROAS metric then?
Well, so this is a hotly debated topic. But for a CFO or a CEO, my opinion, and this is supported by my work, I suppose, is that blended ROAS is the best metric for you to manage agencies' internal teams. Why? Because it relates directly to your P&L. You have revenue, you have ad spend, and you have profits in there, and you can divide them, and you can map it right onto your P&L all day. So because it's so direct, it is the number that I focus the most on as a CFO. When I'm diving in with marketing teams, I can dig into CTRs and all this stuff, but from a high level, it's ROAS. And so we looked at their ROAS, and we just, again, we monitored it, and we just had a hunch that it was unprofitable amount of spend. And as they cut spend back, blended ROAS skyrocketed in a way that we didn't expect, to be honest. Like, we didn't expect it to be that good. And like I say, they went profitable. And so understanding there's a portion of spend where there's an optimal amount, or there's an optimal contribution margin in dollar, and they were well beyond it. And somehow Leandro figured it out. I should ask him how we figured it out. Or maybe you can interview him someday, but anyway, whatever. But he figured it out, not me. And they made so much more money. And they didn't, their sales decreased, but they made so much more money.
Yeah. Matt, at the end of the day, the gist is this, revenue is vanity and profit is sanity, and
100%.
Cash is king, right? And that's the saying. And for an e-commerce brand owner, you've got to make sure that you understand the ins and outs of your cash flow. You've got to be getting that cash flow statement on a monthly basis from your bookkeeper, and you need to understand what's impacting your cash flow the most. Is it the inventory you're purchasing? Is it the advertising that you're purchasing? Because any little change that you can make here can make a dramatic effect in terms of bringing in additional capital that you could then use to fund the growth of the business. And again, everybody loves to, shout out how big their top line revenue is. But good grief, if you've taken on a bunch of debt and you're not really bringing home a salary, like, what's this all for? Like,
totally.
it's just very challenging. So, Matt, as we wrap up this episode, I love to leave each episode with 3 actionable takeaways for our audience. So here are the actionable takeaways that I've noted. Let me know if I'm missing anything here. Action item number 1 is going to be to get very lean with your business operations as a whole, which means do not hire for who you want to become. 3 years from now, I want to be $100 million brand. That doesn't mean you start hiring VP level individuals
100%.
that are working for other $100 million brands. Okay. So that's action item number 1. In addition to that, I'm also going to layer on the operational aspect of cut your SKUs that are not helping you, right? So look at the bottom 20% of SKUs and decide if you can cut them, because it will free up some mental capacity for your team. It will free up inventory and cash that you're investing into that inventory and allow you to then, again, double down on the areas where you're winning better. So that's action item number 1. Action item number 2 is going to be getting creative with your supplier. So I can't tell you the number of times whenever we've talked about finance and cash flow for any e-commerce businesses, guess what it all comes down to? Your relationship with your supplier. That's the end all be all. And so if you're listening to this and you've already heard some of the other financial related podcasts that I've recorded about this topic, start taking action on this. And I love what you talked about, the kind of the nibble strategy, which is don't ask for net 90 days today, right? If you're at 50-50 right now, 50 up front, 50 when it ships, you've got a long way to go. It doesn't mean you can't get there. But it also is like, you need to have a relationship with that supplier, which means going and meeting with them in person.
Yeah.
It means you need to have a track record of doing what you say you're going to do and you actually doing it, right? Keep your word, pay your bills on time. The only way you're able to ever get to net 30, net 60, net 90 is if you have always paid your bills on time.
Yeah.
And you have a long-standing relationship with the supplier. And this is like, you guys see this as a partnership together. That truly is your cheapest and your best financing partner that you can have. Because the alternatives, as you mentioned, Kick Further with the 40% APR, that's your alternative.
Yep.
If you want to go the lazy man route, then you're paying for it in terms of those interest rates. Okay. Action item number 3 is going to be getting creative with how you can stack different either credit cards together or financing options. And I love that you laid out a lot of new ones that I hadn't heard before. So between Kick Further, Settle, the Parker card, the Amex Plum card, there are some very creative strategies where if you can delay the payment of your inventory, you're still paying your supplier on time. Don't get me wrong. You pay them on time, but the cash doesn't actually leave your bank account until you actually started making money, right? That inventory is already in Amazon. You've actually already been receiving, your 2-week delay payment terms from Amazon for that money. And then that amount leaves your bank account. Now you're off to scale to the moon. So, Matt, those are my 3 actionable takeaways from our episode today. Anything I missed?
No, I think you got it. People could think of this contribution dollar thing, but again, you'll send them the tool on that. So, yeah.
Well, and I think the contribution dollar thing, I think it is very valuable, right? But it all kind of like stems around the same thing as
100%.
Like, how much are you paying on ads and how quickly is, money leaving your bank account, right? All of it comes full circle. So, and we'll drop that in the show notes. So
cool.
Thanks again for sending that template.
Of course.
Matt, here's the best part of the episode. 3 questions I love to ask each guest. Number 1, what's been the most influential book that you've read and why?
This has changed just this past year. The book by Gino Wickman, I think Traction EOS. I sort of read it, and then I had a client using it, and then we started using it, and we've grown our business like from 5 staff. Now we're 22. Revenues are like triple they were last year, and there's no way I'd be able to handle it without EOS.
Yeah, that is a solid book.
Yeah.
Definitely something I would recommend. We actually, the last episode, go back and listen to that one. That is all about how to implement an operating system into your business. So, and we talk about EOS. So go back, look at the very last episode. You'll hear all about it. All right. Question number 2 here. Matt, what is your favorite productivity tool or a new software tool that you think many people don't know about, but you think is a game changer?
Oh, don't know about. Here's one. Office Vibe. Office Vibe is like a employee NPS, so Net Promoter Score, but for your staff. If you have more than 8 to 10 people, I would recommend using this tool. It's fairly cheap, and it helps you keep a read on how people are feeling, how they're doing. It surfaces anonymous comments, and every time I've implemented that in a business I owned or for somebody else, we've been able to do better with engagement with our staff.
I love that. I have not heard of that tool before, so I'm a big fan.
Awesome.
All right, Matt, final question. Who is somebody that you admire or respect the most in the e-commerce space that other people should be following, and why?
Yeah. I would say that if I could do 2 right now, one is Taylor Holiday from Common Thread Collective. He is writing a lot right now about bridging finance and marketing and growth and marrying the two together for cash flow, right? Preston Rutherford is the other person I want people to follow. And the reason why is he's talking a lot lately about building the brand, building a stable and growing base of repeat, organic traffic and visibility. And his sort of, what he learned through his time at Chubby's is that most of the growth and profit came from their focus on building that sort of recognition and organic base. And so he's obviously more eloquent about it. And he's beginning to start discussing how do you measure the effect of that indirect spend? Because again, you can measure direct acquisition, but how do you understand how to spend money on this other stuff? He's beginning to figure that out for folks and talk about that. So these guys don't agree with each other on this at all, but they're both really, really smart. And I love like the interplay. Yeah. They don't argue publicly, actually, which I wish they would, but anyway.
Awesome recommendations and some people to follow. Now, Matt, this has been an awesome episode. If people want to learn more, they want to follow you, they want to reach out, where can people follow you at?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, connect, and I answer basically every single DM and most comments. And then you can check out my site, 8x.co, EIGHTX.co. You can book meetings with me there. Sometimes it's my sales team, to be honest now. But yeah, if you want like the one-to-ones, like LinkedIn and DM me and stuff, I see and respond to almost all those. Unless it's like, hey, you want to get a coffee? Like, no, I don't respond to those. But if they ask me an interesting question, I'll respond. Yeah.
Awesome. Love that. Well, Matt, thanks again for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us all.
This was so nice. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm kind of like, pretty stoked to get to meet you now after seeing you a year ago.
Well, thanks again, Matt.
Thank you for listening. Visit ecommbreakthrough.com for more information. If you've enjoyed today's episode, the best way you can show your appreciation is by clicking the subscribe button and quickly leaving a review. See you again next time.